Betrayal. My fiancée left me for a best man her family chose. My family says I deserve better. Years later, she's fuming after seeing my wins and my soulmate. Imagine pouring 4 years of your life, your entire heart and soul, into someone, building a future together, only to discover their family has been tearing you down behind your back, and the person you love most has been quietly nodding along. That's a pain that cuts deeper than any breakup. The air in my cramped, one-bedroom apartment always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and ambition back then. It was a Tuesday evening, the city lights just starting to bleed through the window, when I finally understood that my dream, our dream, was a lie. I'm Caleb, and at 29, I was a man obsessed, building AI-powered automation tools from scratch, often pulling 16-hour days. My hands-on keyboard grind was fueled by a vision, and by Chloe. She was 26 when we met, sharp and vibrant in marketing, always telling me how much she admired my passion, how I could make complex algorithms sound like poetry. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Davis, though? They were a different breed entirely. Old money, the kind of family where your last name is a golden key and appearances are everything. They never outright called me trash, they were far too refined for such vulgarity. But every interaction felt like a subtle, draining test I was constantly failing. The first time I met them, Mr. Davis, with a tight, almost condescending smile, asked about my work. When I mentioned AI automation, he just chuckled, oh, like chatbots, as if my entire life's work was some trivial hobby. Mrs. Davis was worse, always circling back to stability and planning for the future, asking Chloe loaded questions about where we'd live, how we'd afford children, what kind of schools they'd attend. Each question hammered home the same unspoken message: he can't provide. My teeth would ache from clenching my jaw. Chloe would always defend me afterward, sweet-talking about how her parents were just old-fashioned, that they'd come around once my startup took off. That love was what truly mattered. And I, like a fool, believed her. 3 years in, I proposed. I'd saved for 6 grueling months to buy a ring that wasn't ostentatious, but certainly wasn't cheap. She said yes, right there in the same apartment where I coded until 3 a.m., tears of joy streaming down her face. For a while, it felt real. We were planning a small wedding, talking about our future home, all the normal, exciting things. But the Devises' comments grew more frequent, sharper. When Chloe mentioned we were waiting for my software to launch, Mrs. Davis would go utterly silent, that loaded quiet speaking volumes. Mr. Davis began casually dropping names of successful young men from their circle, lawyers making junior partner, investment bankers, always with a pointed glance my way. Chloe would just sit there, nodding politely, oblivious, or perhaps uncaring, that I felt like a cheap prop in their well-orchestrated charade. The breaking point arrived 6 months after the engagement. It wasn't some explosive fight. It was far more insidious. Chloe had invited me for dinner at her parents' house. I got there early, letting myself in through the side door as I'd done countless times. As I walked past the study, I heard voices, Mr. and Mrs. Davis, and Chloe. My name caught my ear. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob. Mr. Davis's voice was calm, almost clinical, as if discussing a disappointing business venture. He told Chloe I was nice, probably talented, but potential doesn't pay mortgages. My blood ran cold. Then Mrs. Davis chimed in, we didn't raise you to struggle, dear. You deserve someone established, someone who can give you the life you're used to. I held my breath, my heart hammering, waiting for Chloe to leap to my defense, to tell them they were wrong, that they were being unfair. Instead, I heard her voice, quiet and small. I know, Mom. I know. I just thought he'd have real traction by now. Something in my chest cracked. The sound was deafening in my own head. Mr. Davis continued, his words like nails in a coffin, love doesn't pay for weddings, or houses, or private schools. She shouldn't settle when there were men who could give her everything. Mrs. Davis then brought up Blake Harrison, specifically mentioning how Chloe and he always got along, how he'd made junior partner at a major corporate law firm at only 30. Blake Harrison. The name embedded itself in my mind like a venomous splinter. I backed out silently, my legs numb. I texted Chloe a shaky lie about a code emergency and drove home in a daze. I didn't confront her that night. I said nothing. I just sat at my desk, staring at lines of code, and realized the brutal truth: I had been auditioning for a role I was never, ever going to get. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Davis called. Her voice, sickly sweet, invited us both to a small family dinner. I wanted to refuse, to scream, but Chloe looked so hopeful, so eager, believing this was their moment of acceptance. So I buttoned up a clean shirt and showed up. Blake Harrison was there, lounging in the living room like he owned the place, perfectly coiffed, a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than my entire startup. Mrs. Davis introduced him as an old family friend, and he shook my hand with a grip that lingered just a second too long. Dinner was an absolute excruciation. Mr. Davis interrogated Blake about his cases, his clients, his firm's mergers. Blake answered with effortless confidence, while I felt like a bewildered child at the adults' table. Every time I tried to contribute, the conversation veered away, and Chloe just smiled, oblivious or uncaring, as her parents orchestrated this live comparison. At one point, Mr. Davis turned to me, asking about my launch timeline. Before I could even open my mouth, Mrs. Davis cut in, gushing about how Blake had just closed a 6-figure deal. Blake, to his credit, looked slightly embarrassed, but not enough to actually deflect. I excused myself early, mumbling about debugging. Chloe walked me to the door. "Did you know Blake would be here?" I asked, my voice flat. She hesitated, just long enough for me to know the answer was a resounding yes. She touched my arm, saying it was just dinner, not to read into it. But I was already reading into it. I was reading the whole damn book. The breakup came 3 days later, in her apartment, late at night, after 72 hours of barely sleeping. "We need to talk," she started. I already knew. I let her say it anyway. "I love you, Caleb, I really do. But I need stability. I need to know we're going to be okay. I can't keep waiting for someday." Her voice cracked on someday as if she were the victim. "Is this about Blake?" I asked. She looked away. Answer enough. She started to mumble about her parents' thoughts, and I cut her off. "Is it their thinking, Chloe? Oh. Are your thinking?" She went silent. Then she slid the ring off her finger, that ring I'd worked overtime for, and placed it on the coffee table between us, like evidence in a trial. She told me she needed more than dreams, someone already there. I stood up. I couldn't sit anymore. "You didn't choose a better man, Chloe," I said, not yelling, just stating a brutal, quiet fact. "You chose safety." And I walked out. 2 days later, my buddy Ethan sent me a screenshot, Chloe and Blake on Instagram, his arm around her, the caption about finding her forever with a heart emoji. I stared at that photo for a long, long time before I deleted all my social media. The universe, as I was about to learn, has a truly sick sense of humor. 3 months after Chloe left, my startup crashed. And I ended up delivering food to her and her perfect new boyfriend. People talk about rock bottom like it's a single, dramatic moment. It's not. It's a slow, agonizing slide where every week, something else breaks, and you just keep falling. After the breakup, I threw myself into my work, convinced I'd show them all. I'd code 18 hours a day, pitching, selling, building something so undeniable, they'd choke on their judgment. I got close, too. 2 potential investors, meetings scheduled, term sheets drafted. Then the first one backed out, market too crowded, differentiation not clear enough. The second ghosted me after 3 months of stringing me along. By the time I realized what was happening, I'd burned through my entire savings keeping servers running. My landlord wanted rent I didn't have. Credit cards maxed. I had to shut everything down. My dream evaporated. Ethan told me I could crash at his place. I moved in with 2 duffel bags and a laptop. Everything I owned fit in the bed of my truck. I needed money, any money. So, I signed up for food delivery apps, the kind where you drive for 12 hours and make maybe $100 if you're lucky. It was humiliating beyond words. Going from building AI systems to hauling burgers and Chinese takeout. But pride doesn't pay bills. I was drowning. I worked nights mostly, driving through the same neighborhoods where Chloe and I used to have dates. Every street corner felt like a ghost. Ethan was a rock. He never made me feel bad, never asked when I'd get back on my feet. He just split his groceries with me and pretended not to notice when I couldn't chip in for rent. 3 months into this new life, I was numb, running on autopilot, accepting orders and dropping them off without really seeing anything. Then one night, I got an order for an upscale Italian place downtown. The kind of restaurant Chloe always wanted to go to, but I could never afford. I should have known right then that the universe was setting me up. I picked up the order, 2 entrees and a bottle of wine, and drove to this fancy apartment building with a doorman and everything. Took the elevator up to the 8th floor. I knocked on apartment 814. Blake Harrison opened the door. He recognized me instantly. I saw it in his eyes, that flash of surprise, followed by something worse, pity mixed with amusement. He didn't say anything at first, just took the bag from my hands. Then Chloe appeared behind him, asking who it was. She saw me. Standing there in my delivery jacket, the logo emblazoned across it, holding their receipt. Her face went completely white. For a second, nobody moved. We just stood there in this horrible, frozen moment. And I could see behind them, into their apartment, exposed brick, modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place I'd once promised Chloe we'd have someday. Blake broke the silence. "Have a good night," he said, in a tone that wasn't quite mocking, but definitely wasn't kind either. Like he was talking to the help. He handed me a crisp $20 bill as a tip. Chloe still hadn't said a word. She just stood there, hand over her mouth. And I realized she wasn't going to. She wasn't going to acknowledge me, or defend me, or do anything except watch. I took the 20. "Thank you," I said, "because that's what you do." Then I walked back to the elevator, feeling utterly gutted. The worst part wasn't that they saw me like that, delivering their fancy dinner in my beat-up jacket. It was that Chloe stayed silent again. Just like she had with her parents. Just like she had at that family dinner. And in that moment, I finally understood. This was who she was. I drove back to Ethan's place and sat in my truck for an hour, not crying, not angry, just empty. Ethan found me eventually, asked what happened. I told him everything. He offered to go egg their apartment, which would have been funny if I wasn't so tired. Instead, I went inside, opened my laptop for the first time in weeks, and started deleting things. Every digital trace of the life I'd tried to build. Ethan asked what I was doing. "I don't want revenge," I told him. "I want out." And I meant it. I was done trying to prove anything to anyone. Done chasing some fantasy of showing up Chloe and her family. Done letting them live rent-free in my head. That night was a turning point. Not because everything got better immediately, but because I stopped performing for an invisible audience. The AI startup thing was dead. I'd burned every bridge with investors, and I didn't have the credibility to start over in that space. So, I needed something completely different. I started small, really small, taking contract work. Basic website maintenance, IT support for local businesses. It wasn't glamorous. I spent a lot of time resetting passwords and troubleshooting printer issues, but it was steady. And it was mine. I advertised on local community boards, charged reasonable rates, and actually showed up on time, which, surprisingly, put me ahead of half the competition. After 6 months of that, I'd saved enough to move into my own place. Nothing fancy, a studio apartment above a dry cleaner, but it had 4 walls and a door that locked, and I didn't have to apologize to anyone for existing. Ethan threw me a housewarming party, just him and 2 other friends, with pizza and cheap beer. It felt more real than any of those fancy dinners at the Davis's house ever had. But something kept gnawing at me during those contract jobs. I kept seeing the same problem: small businesses drowning in manual processes, spending hours on tasks that could be automated, but couldn't afford enterprise solutions. That's when it clicked. The AI tools I'd built before were aimed too high, trying to compete with the big players. But there was a massive, underserved market right in front of me. I started coding again, but differently this time. Building lightweight automation tools specifically for small and mid-sized companies. Things that could integrate with their existing systems without requiring a complete overhaul. I kept my contract work during the day to pay the bills, and coded all night. Within 6 months, I had a working product. I called it Streamline AI, focused on document processing and workflow automation, and priced it at a point where small businesses could actually afford it. My first client was a local accounting firm that was manually entering data from hundreds of invoices every month. My tool cut their processing time by 70%. That led to referrals, which led to more clients. Within a year, I had enough recurring revenue to quit the contract work. I brought on a partner, a guy named Mark, who'd been doing business development for decades. We started targeting mid-sized companies, the kind too small for the enterprise giants, but too big for manual processes. The irony wasn't lost on me that a lot of our clients were in professional services, law firms, consulting agencies, the exact world that had, just a few years earlier, so thoroughly rejected me. 2 years after that night at apartment 814, Streamline AI was processing millions of documents monthly. We had 20 employees. I'd moved into an actual house with a dedicated office, where I could work without sitting on my bed. Success is weird when it finally shows up, because it doesn't feel like the movies. There's no dramatic, single moment where everything clicks. It's just a series of small wins that eventually add up to something you didn't quite expect. Streamline AI became one of the fastest-growing automation platforms in the region. We'd been featured in 2 major tech publications, and venture capital firms that had ghosted me years earlier were suddenly returning my calls. I bought a small house, nothing extravagant, but it was mine, with an actual home office and space to think. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't worried about money. I met someone, too. Her name was Harper. She worked as a physical therapist and had zero interest in status or impressing anyone. She'd actually reached out because her clinic needed help streamlining their patient intake process, and we just clicked. She knew about Chloe. I told her the whole story on our 3rd date, figuring she deserved to know what she was getting into. She just shrugged and said, "People who choose based on their parents' opinions usually end up miserable." We'd been together for 8 months when the universe decided to remind me that karma doesn't forget anyone. I was at a tech conference downtown, the kind of industry event where founders and investors network, pitching their companies. Mark had convinced me to take a booth to showcase our latest features. We were getting decent attention. Several companies wanted demos, and I was talking to a potential client when I saw them across the exhibition hall, Chloe and Blake Harrison. Dressed like they were at a gala fundraiser instead of a tech conference. They looked so out of place, it was almost funny. Blake saw me first. He did this weird double take, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then he said something to Chloe, pointing in my direction. I watched her face change as she recognized me. Watched her scan the crowd, then our booth, the massive banner with Streamline AI's logo, our client list. I could practically see her doing the math in her head. They didn't come over right away, just kind of hovered at a distance. I went back to my conversation like they weren't there, because honestly, they weren't important anymore. The potential client turned into an actual client, signing a contract for a full implementation. By the time I finished the paperwork, Chloe was standing at the edge of our booth. She looked different, still beautiful, but tired in a way I couldn't quite place, like someone who'd been smiling for too long. She asked if she could talk to me. I almost said no. But Harper had taught me that closure sometimes means letting people say what they need to say. So, I told Mark I'd be back in 5 minutes and walked with Chloe to a quieter corner of the hall. She started with small talk, asking how I'd been, saying the company looked incredible. I just waited. I knew she hadn't pulled me aside to discuss automation workflows. Finally, she got to it. She told me she'd made a mistake, that she'd listened to her parents instead of her heart, that she'd chosen security over happiness, and had been paying for it ever since. I asked what she meant. She admitted Blake wasn't who she thought he was. That the pressure of maintaining his image had made him controlling and distant. That her parents still weren't satisfied, because nothing was ever enough for them. Then she mentioned something that made the pieces click. Blake's firm had been struggling. They'd lost several major clients to more efficient competitors, and he'd been passed over for senior partner twice now. She looked at me with these desperate eyes. I should have believed in us, Caleb. I should have waited. And I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a kind of distant sadness for the person she could have been. That was your choice to make, I told her softly. You chose the path you thought was safe, and now you have to live with it. She started to say something about second chances, about how good we'd been together once. I stopped her there, gently but firmly. I'm with someone now, Chloe. Someone who's never asked me to be anything other than myself. And I'm happy in a way I never was with you. You didn't just choose Blake, Chloe, I said, my voice steady. You chose your parents' approval over building something real. And that's something I can't fix for you. Her face crumpled a little. She asked if I hated her. I told her, honestly, that I didn't, that I'd stopped thinking about her years ago. Somehow, that seemed to hurt her more than anger would have. We stood there for another minute in awkward silence. Then she thanked me for talking to her and walked back to where Blake was waiting, looking annoyed and checking his phone. The real irony came 2 weeks later. Blake Harrison's firm reached out to Mark about a potential partnership. They wanted to integrate Streamline AI into their document management system. Said they were losing clients because their processes were too slow and outdated. Mark brought me the inquiry with this knowing look, and I had to laugh at the cosmic joke of it all. Blake Harrison's law firm, the same firm that represented everything the Devises valued, was now coming to me for help because they couldn't keep up with the market. I thought about it for exactly 5 seconds before I told Mark to decline, politely. We're focused on clients who've supported us from the beginning, I said, not ones who only show up when they're desperate. Mark didn't argue. He just sent a professional response, referring them to our competitors. A few days later, Mr. Davis called the office directly. Mark transferred it to me before I could stop him. Chloe's dad used his business voice, the smooth one he probably used with everyone. Talked about how impressive our growth had been, how he'd been following our success. He asked if we'd reconsider working with Blake's firm. I let him finish, let him compliment my business acumen, and then I very politely told him that we had a full client roster and were being selective about new partnerships. He offered premium rates, expedited payments, whatever we needed. I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice, the dawning realization that he was asking for a favor from someone he'd once considered beneath his daughter. Harper asked me later if I felt vindicated, if turning them down felt like justice. I had to think about it. The truth was, it didn't feel like anything dramatic. It just felt like closing a door that should have been closed years ago. I'd spent 2 years thinking about them, another 2 years not thinking about them, and now they were back, asking for help. And I simply didn't owe them anything. They wanted someone who was already successful, I told Harper. I became successful without them. And that's the whole point. She kissed me and said that was the right answer. We went back to planning our weekend trip. Something simple and normal, and ours. Chloe tried reaching out one more time, about a month later. I saw a message request from a new account, but I didn't open it. I just archived it without reading, because whatever she had to say wasn't going to change anything. the DeVises stopped calling. Blake's firm found some other solution, and my life continued forward without them in it. 6 months after that tech conference, I heard through the industry grapevine that Blake had left his firm. Something about the partners pushing him out after too many blown opportunities. And apparently, the DeVises weren't taking it well. But by then, I was already on to the next thing, expanding Streamline AI into new markets, planning a future with Harper, and living a life where their approval had never mattered less. What do you think about this story? Have you ever had to choose between validation and your own path? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life stories like this one.